I previously served right here at Harvard Hillel as an Orthodox advisor and associate director for education, and as Talmud curriculum chair at Maimonides High School. He's published many articles in Tradition, Orod, Dinei Yisrael, Beit Yitzchak, and other journals, and has presented at numerous academic and community conferences. He's a popular lecturer who is consulted internationally on issues, and I consult myself from time to time, issues of Jewish law, and whose work is studied regularly by both academic and traditional scholars. I'll say really on a personal level, I've only had the pleasure of encountering Rabbi Klapper a couple of times, and each time I'm blown away by his breadth and depth of Jewish knowledge. And also many of my students in the past, and also some of my fellow rabbinical students, have studied at the Summer Beit Midrash, and all have come back with great reviews. Rabbi Klapper is really remarkable at looking at modern issues of halachic importance with a real insightful eye, and kind of nuanced, and also speaks that nuance, conveys that nuance with tremendous clarity. So it is my distinct honor to welcome Rabbi Klapper here this evening.
Pastor, are we actually going to pull off Kobritza for 20 minutes?
What was that?
Are we going to pull off Kobritza for 20
Sure.
minutes? Okay. So, first of all, thank you very, very much. It's great to be back here. I spent 10 of the best years of my life speaking from the Stender. And really, one of the joys of my life really was the times when I got to teach Torah to this group of people who always reacted, no matter how ridiculously challenging I got, by asking for more and higher. So I hope that you'll all be in that mood tonight. I want to set brief parameters out for what I want to accomplish tonight, and then I want to send you off to Fabrita for about 20 minutes. We agreed that would be a really good thing, and I'll explain why. And then we'll get to the actual shiur. First of all, did we set up some kind of recording device?
Yeah.
We did. Okay, excellent, thank you. Because my recorder, as always, I failed to charge. I want to talk about the official title of Partnership Minyanim and the boundaries of Orthodoxy. I want to make clear that I don't want to spend any time at all debating the specific questions of the specific practices of Partnership Minyanim and whether or not they are halachically acceptable in my own opinion. If you want, I have a shiur online about that topic, but I want to start with the premise that we all basically agree that an argument can be made to justify such practices, and at least two such arguments have been made, one by Rabbi Mendel Shapiro, the other by Rabbi Daniel Sperber, and the arguments can be made against such practices. Such a decision was made by Rabbi Herzl Henkin, and lengthy extended arguments have been made over and over again by Rabbi Aryeh. And I'm going to work on the premise that neither argument is dispositive intellectually. Right? Meaning that an objective person reading the sources could reach the conclusion that the specific practices, let's focus specifically on giving aliyot to women, are prohibited. That's a reasonable position for each based on the sources. And a reasonable person could reach the conclusion that such practices are permitted. And I want to begin the analysis after that point. Now, the other thing that should be evident from the outset analysis is that I'm not assuming that everything for which an intellectually reasonable argument can be made is necessarily within the contours of Orthodoxy or halakhic legitimacy. Because if that were so, then we could end the shiur right now. There would be no question, once I concede that an intellectually plausible argument can be made, right, then the conversation would be over. So I want to make that concession and say that that really should be the start of the conversation and not the end of it. Okay, so what I want to do to make sure that this was a shiur that was an experience of classic Talmud Torah and not a sociological analysis by a visiting rabbi. So I'm going to send you into Fabrita to study at least one, and hopefully you'll have time to study two classical halachic topics. One of them, the first, is the question of whether Chatzi Shiur Asur Min HaTorah or Chatzi Shiur Mitar Min HaTorah, whether half measures of prohibited things are biblically prohibited or not, and specifically the analysis that is given by Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman of that. And I'm going to try to frame the most of the shiur, first half or so of the shiur, in terms of the classic distinction Rabbi Wasserman makes in terms of why it might be prohibited to, right, why half measures might be prohibited. I'll mention as an editorial comment right now that when I first designed the shiur, I thought that would be simple. I'll just put Rabbi Hanan's framework on paper, everyone will study it. It turned out, to my dismay, that I actually never studied Rabbi Hanan's position inside. I just learned it from everybody who was in the world of yeshivot. It turns out to be a fascinating essay in its own right, far more complex than the way that I will be constrained to teach it to you tonight. But you can all check my blog or Facebook page later in the week when the written version of this shiur comes up, and I will attach to it a full translation of the full essay of Rabbi Wasserman, which is really an enormous amount of fun. The second half of the shiur is less classical in the sense that it will relate to an intellectual argument I make myself, which is on the topic of lo tisgodedu, which is framed by the rabbis as a prohibition against factionalizing the halakhic community. And so I'm going to give you two understandings of that prohibition. One Maimonides and the other one by Rashi. I should tell you up front that the understanding I will give you of Rashi's understanding is, so far as I know, my own. So you can reject the whole shiur out of hand because you think I misread Rashi. But for the purposes of this shiur, it would be nice if you would accept it. And I'm rather proud of it, so I hope that you'll be nice about it. And so at the very least, at the end of the shiur, you will have learned Rabbi Hanan about Tatzi Shiur and a possibly cool new reading of Rashi on lo tisgodedu. So you won't have wasted your time religiously. And when you go up to 120 years, God will reward you as opposed to punish you for having spent time listening, I hope. And hopefully in the process also you'll have learned something. You'll learn something that will contribute to advancing what I think is a really important conversation going on in our community about the boundaries of Orthodoxy, with specific reference to partnership Minyanim, although it's not clear to me that partnership Minyanim actually have to be the locus of that conversation, as opposed to simply being a good occasion for talking about the nature of what Orthodox community should be, and what halakhic community should be. And I will say up front also that I don't assume that the word Orthodox is magic, and that when God gave the Torah and translated it, He said you should be Orthodox Jews. I do assume that He said you should be halakhic Jews. And one of the questions that has to be discussed is the extent to which those two terms in our contemporary sociological reality should be coterminous. Okay, so with that, hopefully find a chavrit or a group of friends next to you, and please spend the next 20 minutes studying the sources of those two issues, and at 8:10 we'll reconvene, and I'll start talking again.